There are quite a few often repeated lies told by various anti Semites regarding the situation in Israel and its surrounding Arab neighbors. These lies are repeated over and over again in the hopes that eventually otherwise intelligent people will begin to believe them. This was a strategy used by Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi who controlled newspapers, radio, film, publishing, and even music to promote anti Semitism in Germany and other countries during the Second World War. The communists in the Soviet Union employed the same tactics. Now, one of the words that the supporters of Hamas like to repeat is the word occupation. These are occupied territories. The Jews are occupying our lands. The West Bank is occupied. The absurdity of calling the indigenous people of this area occupiers seems to slip by the minds of otherwise intelligent people. It's no different from calling the indigenous peoples of Canada or Australia occupiers. Also, the Free Palestine protesters at our universities and those who are constantly marching on our streets are completely ignorant of the history of the area, of Islam and the Jewish people. It is not the Jews who occupied Palestine. It was Islam starting in the 7th century and continuing for 1400 years. Now, I don't have the time to delineate the entire history of Islam, but here's a brief. After the death of Mohammed in 632 AD, his successors, or caliphs, began a military campaign to conquer the entire Middle East and beyond. Prior to this time, places like Egypt were almost entirely Coptic Christians. The Levant, which includes the area referred to as Palestine, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon, were also predominantly Christian, with a smattering of Judaism and Samaritism. Iraq was dominated by Christianity, and Iran was mainly Zoroastrian. So how did this entire area become almost entirely Muslim over the years? Well, the Islamic armies tended to use different methods to impose their religion on the masses. Sometimes it was either convert or die by the sword. Islam was never much good at tolerating other religions. Or otherwise, people who did not convert were reduced to second and third class citizens. Christians and Jews were not allowed to hold office or any of several professions. They were forced to pay a tax called a jizya. They had to wear identifying clothing. The Jews were forced to wear a yellow star, while Christians had to wear a special belt. The Muslim viewed Jews and Christians as similar to dogs to be avoided and shunned. If a Jew or Christian was walking down the street and a Muslim approached, they had to cross to the other side of the street so that Muslims could avoid being contaminated. Eventually, anyone who desired upward social mobility or who wanted to escape Muslim persecution had to convert. That is why today Muslim countries are practically devoid of Jews, and where Christians have been reduced to less than 10% of the population of Muslim countries like Egypt or Indonesia. There are more Muslims living in Israel alone than Jewish people living in all 54 Muslim majority countries combined. That is a brief history of how Islam occupied the Middle East, including Palestine. One other little-known fact from relatively recent history: Israel emerged victorious in the 1948 war against 5 Arab countries to establish a homeland for the Jewish people. One of the countries trying to eliminate the Jews was Jordan. Jordan did not succeed in driving the Jews into the sea, which they had intended to do. However, they did manage to capture the area now called the West Bank, as well as East Jerusalem. Jordan occupied this area until Israel won it back in 1967. The same thing can be said about Egypt, who won a territory now referred to as the Gaza Strip, and then occupied it until Israel won it back in 1967. Thus, you can see that calling an Israel an occupier is simply a bit of Nazi Goebbels-inspired lying propaganda. And I referred to the Nazis because the progenitor of Hamas and their Muslim Brotherhood was the Mufti of Jerusalem, who met with Hitler in the 1940s and who planned German-style concentration camps for the Jews in the Middle East. A final note regarding the purveyors of Hamas propaganda. Please remember that in the Judeo-Christian envelope there is a strong condemnation against lying. In fact, "Thou shalt not lie" is one of the 10 Commandments. However, under Islam, you have no such restriction. In fact, it is the opposite. Muslims are obligated to lie if they think their statements are in defense of Islam. So the next time you hear some fanatic Islamist proclaim anything, ask yourself, is he lying? And how can you tell?